Great. So I can share just a little bit of what I was envisioning for the structure of our time together. We're bringing together different worlds, so that requires a little bit of time to enter each other's worlds. And one world is community radio, and one world is community economies. And so I was thinking we could have some time for the radio people to start us off with a little bit of an introduction. And these can be like 1 to 3 minute, a little bit about the you, but then, and also the radio world that you are with. And then we'll do a little bit of community economies, sharing an introduction, and maybe we can even have the people in the broadcast Zoom who are connected with that world to say a little bit about their own connections to community economies, and it is a particular language and framework that is nice to share. And then I was hoping we could do something that I call a think along. And I can also explain a little bit about that when I introduce the radio station that I'm connected to. So Sean, would you like to start off by saying a little bit about you and the radio station you're connected to? And we had such a great intro yesterday that actually also activates a lot of the overlaps between these worlds too. So if you want to share about that.
Hi, yeah, my name is Sean Finnan. I'm a researcher based in the Technological University in Dublin. My research, I guess it's interested in how small scale radio stations and particularly online radio stations create spaces for sociability, for people to meet each other, for cultural exchange. And I guess the interest was sparked because I was a co-founder of a radio station called Dublin Digital Radio back in 2016. And yeah, I guess the objectives or the reasons that we wanted to start a radio station was we felt that there was kind of a dwindling um, alternative media sphere in the city for the exchange of music, ideas, politics, and we wanted to create a media space that reflected what we were coming across in the city, like all these different kind of political movements that were happening, kind of anti-gentrification stuff, like stuff around abortion rights, I guess. And yeah, the radio, we wanted it to be a vehicle for like the exchange of ideas that wasn't happening elsewhere. And then after 4 years, 5 years of doing it, it became like, I guess, more and more of a passion that I wanted to get into studying it further. And that's what sparked this PhD I'm studying at the moment. Um, yeah, and there's definitely more that I could discuss, but maybe that will come up throughout the conversation later as well.
Great. And did you say, did Dublin Digital Radio, it's 24/7? Is that what or did you say that, and it's
Yeah,
online? Yeah.
so the stream is 24/7. Yeah, but I guess live broadcasts are not 24/7. It depends on the day, but generally we will have new shows from maybe about, it depends on the day, but midday until midnight. Some of these shows will be pre-records, some of the shows will be live broadcasts. At the moment, there is no live broadcast because we're in the middle of moving studio, and the new studio, fingers crossed, will be open by the end of this month. So we will have live broadcasts again. But since the end of July, we've been kind of building and working on this new space. And hopefully, when we get this new space, we will be in this new space for maybe the next decade. So we will not have to worry about moving space again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So live programming on Dublin Digital Radio right now. So that's cool. Kind of. And James, do you want to introduce yourself and also the radio station that you and Sam are connected to?
Sure, I can do that. My name's James Previtt, and I'm an artist primarily, or I make sculptures primarily. But my practice has become more and more social, I guess. And in the last 3 to 5 years, it had begun to involve radio, and I was struck similarly, I guess, by what Sean was saying in radio's ability to pull people together. and a very diverse people, I guess. And how I'm just struck by how people can come to radio without any kind of preconceptions, essentially. Much easier than, say, art, which is the other thing that I'm interested in. If you say, do you want to take part in a radio program, it's much more accessible than do you want to take part in an art project. So that, along with, I guess, seeing what kind of media landscape was in Helsinki, me and Samantha decided we wanted to start something that was slightly different, I guess, that wasn't a media space for just DJ culture. So we were more interested in experimental sounds and as an art project, I guess, in a similar way. So what that could bring. So we started OO Radio about a year ago, actually. So we're very young and we're still forming what that is. And we don't have a studio. It is a set of tools as well. It's a nomadic or peripatetic radio. So it kind of pops up. But it is a set of tools as well. So we've made it so that it can broadcast live from any space, any public space, just with batteries, essentially, if you have an internet connection. And it all fits in a rucksack, so so people can borrow the tools to make their own radio. So essentially, the idea is that anyone could set up their studio in their own kitchen, essentially. So that's the idea of it, and I guess we're still that comes with it several other problematics of how to maintain community and other things that we're just figuring out now, I think. But we're having kind of gradually growing a group of people who are interested in contributing and making to this. And we don't broadcast all the time. We broadcast really sporadically at the moment, just as and when. And I think our aim is that we start to program more solidly after Christmas. So we're working up to that, and then it will probably just be one day or one afternoon a week, and then other sporadic things that will happen.
Okay.
And let it grow organically.
Great to hear. And we're sending now on OO Radio now too.
We are live now.
And
we do things like this, talks
yeah.
and things. That's really good.
Samantha, do you want to give a context about what you are up to?
Yes, I don't know why my name's all in block capitals. You don't have to shout. No one has to shout my name. Yeah, I'm Samantha. I live in Lithuania, but I'm British, and I've lived here for the last 4 years. I got brought to the world of radio during COVID, like a lot of people, I think. And that was through my work in like outreach and more kind of socially engaged arts practices. And I was working in housing estates at the time, and there was very few opportunities to connect with people in person, obviously. So together with Resonance FM, we built a 24-hour radio broadcast over about 5-6 weeks. And through that, we did a collection of live and pre-recorded broadcasts across one day. And it was a really amazing way of bringing the community together. And having ran arts projects there for 5 years, as James was saying, as soon as it became a radio broadcast, because it felt so familiar to so many people, like growing up with radio in your kitchen, or it's just something about radio that feels more accessible or felt more accessible to a lot of people. So suddenly we were meeting people locally who had an idea to make a radio broadcast about, I don't know, their experience of being a taxi driver and the music they listen to keep awake, or someone who had an incredible jazz collection and so on. And all these things just really inspired me. And kind of from that, radio spiraled and became a huge part of my life. And now it seems that every artistic endeavor that I work with involves radio in some way now. And a couple of years ago, after meeting so many radio stations in this region, small scale stations, we began to connect, and we felt a need to connect, especially after COVID, having to either close studios or temporarily close them, and feeling like there had been a bit of a rupture in the communities physically. So through through those challenges, and obviously also challenges of sustainability of a lot of these stations, we formed a network, and then from that it's kind of built, and we now have 10 radio stations in the network, and we do all kinds of things together. And actually Radio Multe have been part of that in some ways. And Dublin Digital Radio are also part of that radio network. So it was very much located in the Baltic Nordic region, and it's expanded beyond that since. I won't introduce out of office radio because James has already done a very nice job of that. So
Brilliant. Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Sam has said, it's been amazing to be part of this extended independent community radio network and to see it grow, and to have a research dimension and a practice and very practical dimension. And maybe it's a parallel world to the Community Economies group, which has different action-oriented and reflective practices. So Aviv and Anna, do you want to tell us about the radio station that you're connected to in the Hull area? You know, not hearing you yet, not hearing you. Is there, it doesn't look like you're muted, but I wonder if there's something internally that in the computer. And while you look at that, just to say that Aviv and Anna are also, like myself, have one foot in the community economies, or maybe even more than one foot, a lot of the body parts in the community economies world, and then also run the radio station or are involved in one in Hull. So there's also a fun internal sharing of the practices. No, not hearing you. Well, if it's okay, I will introduce Radio Multe while you play around with that tech. I'll just say Radio Multe is the station that I started here in 2021, here meaning Bergen, Norway. And I moved here to do artistic research, PhD at the university in an art context. And got interested, so I got interested in, you know, I had been making works for radio, but then I have this whole background in community economies, had done a lot of action research in community economies around money and banking, really love working collectively, and love community economies framework, rethinking the economy, the possibilities of the imagination as an incredible, you know, tool for politics of possibility. And while I think it just infected my approach to radio, so that instead of just making pieces for radio, I got interested in the infrastructure of the radio station as an artistic form. And then I've been basically focusing on that in my own art practice. So it's kind of I rethink radio in the same way that I rethink economies. So it's just been very exciting after now completing this PhD, just handed it in 6 weeks ago in artistic research, to now do a full-on mashup of these worlds. And this is the first embarking of these bringing together in this Liviana session. Liviana is an annual symposium online for exploring and sharing all the practices that we do in community economies. So it's wonderful to be able to do a mashup here. And maybe I'll just say one more thing about what I discovered over 4 years of working with the radio station as an artistic form. One is the way that we talk on the radio, like looking at the whole legacy of radio and its impact on how we understand communication. So I would say communication and conversation itself have become artistic materials that I work with. And that's where the idea of the think along comes in. So even thinking, look, working with radio as a space of different alternative subjectivities, alternative ways of thinking and unthinking together, which I think is very resonant with the work of community economies, to unthink and rethink the economy and just how profoundly powerful the narratives and imagination are. and increasingly getting interested in more of the commons of things like FM as a commons, and the internet, which came up in a fun conversation with Sam and Sean yesterday, different ideas of mesh networks and all the different ways communication can be a topic for community economies as well, media. Aviv and Anna, did you get it? If you unmute
I
now.
think so.
Yay! I think
We just switched to the phone.
Yes. Yay.
so
Should
tell us what you're up to over there.
Yes. We facilitate this kind of community radio in our neighborhood. Do you want to talk a little bit about the neighborhood so the people?
Yeah, we live in the HU3 Boulevard Hesel Road area in Hull. It suffers a lot of stigma. It's considered one of the highest neighborhoods of multiple deprivation in the UK. And we've been working here for the past maybe 9 years, and we've been doing radio slightly longer because we started when we were in Barcelona doing a little bit experimenting with community radio. You continue.
Yeah, the radio itself, it fits in a suitcase, so it's nomadic.
We don't have a studio.
We don't have a studio. Nowadays, we are broadcasting from a community space, and it is a collaboration with other projects that it's called Waffle. You want to explain Waffle?
Waffle is a community cafe, a weekly community pay-as-you-feel community cafe, and it's like a meeting point between several really interesting projects here in Hull. Some radical activist project called Corporation Hull, a housing organization we work with a lot called Gyroscope, another social enterprise called Want, We Are Not Takeaway. So there's people cooking, a lot of volunteering, and it's kind of like, it takes place in a community center. And one thing that it was when they moved up to doing Waffle, to creating Waffle, they were asking people, they went door to door, this activist group, Corporation Hall, and they asked people, would you be into us doing a community cafe, a pay-as-you-feel food thing? And everyone said, a lot of people at least said, I think it's a great idea, but not for me because I don't need it. It's just for the needy. And then we came to them and said, this needs to be a cultural event. There needs to be a cultural content to this event so people can see that it's not just about kind of dire need, but it's also about pleasure. Like, you know, it's something that's it's a meeting space for people.
Yeah. I will describe very shortly how is the radio. Normally, what the radio for us is a tool that it kind of generates a social space around, and it's normally quite messy. So it's important what happens behind the microphone, but as well in front of the microphone. Normally there's food, there's children running around, there's lots of different people, and we don't want to be like experts. It's like conversations with all the people around, and no, it is very like it is like this. It's very informal.
This is an example.
Yeah, we allow people to have accidents, technical issues. We learn through the process, and we want the radio to be like this because then the people, they feel free to talk. And other than that, yeah, there's lots of music. The music kind of triggers the conversation sometimes and helps to think along with the music. And yeah, I don't know if I forgot anything. We normally talk about daily things, very simple things, to bring the people into the conversation in a very easy way, and then we go deeper to other subjects and to, yeah.
Now we do, since we've been doing it in Waffle, we've had a theme. Each radio show has a theme, and it's usually something very mundane like porridge or I don't know, what other planets or something like that. And then we use that as a starting point. All the music is about that theme, and then we use that as a starting point to go on kind of more political and philosophical tangents.
That's it.
Fantastic. Hearing you and just actually hearing everyone describe the radio stations that they're connected to makes me, one, I think this would be an interesting transcript just to read, and also to have audio clips, you know, from everybody and to make an audio. Yeah, James. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, what was the name of your radio, Aviv? I didn't hear it.
It's called Bite the Biscuit Radio.
Bite the Biscuit Radio. I think we should.
At some point, it formed part of we were organizing a weekly market called Bite the Biscuit Neighborhood Market in our neighborhood, and this radio formed part of that market as well.
Super. So now we have a moment to transition to the community economies part of the meeting here. And I thought it might be nice I can give like a very quick overview, but I actually thought it would be really fun to do a compilation overview from the people in the broadcast Zoom right now who are in some way connected, however much you feel like speaking. And to say maybe what community economies, what it means to you and how you're working with it, and maybe where you're based geographically. I can just start by saying that community economies, I got involved actually in a very small part of the collective in Western Massachusetts as in 2006, so like way back. I was going to write a kid's book about explaining capitalism because I felt like I just really wanted to better understand it. And I love young adult books and kids' books, and then met someone who's Ted White in the Community Economies Collective and helped me, basically brought me in. And then I worked with Julie Graham and realized a lot of she kind of won me over to like not be so capitalocentric and to, instead of energizing capitalism by understanding it, which is important, to like what happens if we start to rethink the economy and energize and animate the stories of all the alternatives and start to see the economy and hear the economy in a much more diverse way. And I can do a super, hopefully easy screen share for anyone who hasn't already been in community economies. This is kind of hopefully you can see the famous iceberg, which is just that so often when we hear the word economy, it gets conflated with capitalism. So that's kind of like the visible part of the iceberg, but a big part of the community economy's narrative, and I would say action research and politics of possibility, is to see what happens when we start to create a different narrative of what an economy is, and to make apparent and then the whole range of ethical and unethical forms of exchange and interaction, and then to energize the ones whose ethics we resonate with and somehow speak to us, and the projects that we're working on. So that's kind of my own narrative with community economies. And then I got very involved in community currency for many years, which gave me a lot of organizing experience. I did that in a fairly low income part of Western Massachusetts. And then, also got super interested in non-capitalist forms of banking. And it's also interesting to me to radio is a form of this pooling of resources to a radio station. So again, I've continued to see a lot of resonance between the radio station and community economies. So, Ana, Ines, can I just ask you to introduce yourself and also share anything about community economies that you want to add to the quilt of sharing with people in community radio and others, what your connection is to this work and what is alive for you in it?
Sure. I'm based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, as I said before. My native language is Spanish, but I can also speak in English, which is good at this point today. And I was trying to explain before that part of the work I do in community economies is to try and bridge worlds that oftentimes cannot dialogue, because there's people who work in community economies like Perspectives in South America that speak only Spanish, and vice versa. There are people who speak only English, and so those worlds sometimes don't connect. And so part of my work has been to try and understand the similarities and differences across frameworks that may not be spoken as community economies, but they are in the way they do things, at least from my perspective, and vice versa. So one example is that, at least in Argentina, it is very common to speak about economía popular, economía de los trabajadores, agricultura familiar. So those kinds of practices that in practice are communal and orient themselves to be different than capitalistic and capitalocentric practices are alive and have also been transmitted over generations in different languages, not only Spanish, because Spanish is also the language of the conqueror here. So part of the work we've been doing at the Regional is to connect with people whose work is related to places like Bolivia and Peru and Chile and Mexico, whereby, like Argentina, languages such as Mapuche or Aymara or Quechua are used. And so we're also trying to map different concepts in different languages that relate to, again, community and diverse economies and are not spoken in the community economies language because they're crafted in a different mindset and language. So that's part of what I wanted to say. And I also want to bring a different angle, which you made me think about while you were speaking, which is the artistic relationship across community economies, radio, and arts. And I say this because while I was listening to you and to other people speak now, I was thinking that the work that I mentioned before related to people who are suffering from mental health issues and relate to radio practices as part of the process of feeling better, do craft arts into their way of doing radio. So I was thinking that there's a radio that is called Gladiadores de la Sonrisa, which would be translated as gladiators of the smile, or smiling gladiators. They put a program every Saturday whereby they have sections, and the sections are poetry live, music live. So people go and play and say poetry, so on and so forth. And the last thing I'm going to say is that now in Argentina, because of the turmoil that we are experiencing, which is massive, we are practicing, someone said something like sporadic broadcasting, and I thought ours is more like flash broadcasting, because every time we meet or mobilize or march, we put out a radio-like mechanism, and so we pass on the mic, and it resembles a radio, although it's not, but it's called radio, which is interesting to me. So I stopped talking because I'm a talker, so I'll pass the word on, and thank you. I'm enjoying this conversation.
Super interesting. When I teach how to make a radio station as an artistic form, I give the option to not even use radio, like you can really radiate and resonate in a lot of different ways with or without a medium. Will, I haven't met you before, but I'd invite you to say something about who you are, where you are, and how you connect to community economies as a way of also explaining the framework.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet all of you. I know a few faces, but lots of new ones for me as well, and some familiar names, but never actually seen faces. So, hello. Firstly, I'm based in Bristol in the UK, which has various different community radio stations, digital radio stations. I guess I would maybe straddle both, but don't necessarily engage as actively in community radio. But my kind of connection, I suppose, to community economies comes from my PhD, or at least that's where I found my way into it, in a fantastic kind of summer school in Trondheim in Norway. Kind of really engaging with the diverse economies literature and then sort of finding out more about the community economies. But for my PhD, I was kind of using it to look at universities as institutions and thinking about kind of alternative ways of organizing the relationships that form between creative practitioners and researchers within, I guess, research and collaborative research and co-produced research. And I'm kind of coming to the end of that project and being more involved in the Fair and Creative Economies research group at the University of Bristol and University of West England. We're doing a lot of work to bring together a cohort to think about alternative business practice and how to kind of scale out some of the community economies work, bringing them into the world of community economies and then reflecting on their work and sort of trying to scale out alternative ways of being and existing within a kind of within the framework of the arts and specifically the creative economy of Bristol, but hopefully kind of that will build from there, right? One of those groups, although I'm not sure we'll work with them, but one of those groups was Nudes Radio, who are an amazing kind of digital radio station in Bristol. They've just managed to get hold of the building that they're in at the moment. They've kind of done a crowdfunder and got a community asset fund around it. So I've kind of got their stability, which is nice, but obviously still experiencing a lot of precarity like many creatives in the UK and I'm sure globally at the moment. So I just kind of came here mainly to think about how I might connect with other people thinking about this stuff. And I don't know, I'm also just like deeply fascinated in how to further support grassroots creative communities and be part of.
Yeah. So cool. Awesome to meet you and to hear your take on community economies. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking of like how radio is a way of, and maybe arts practices generally are ways of amplifying literally community economies work, but then also are examples of community enterprises that are spaces of experimenting. So there's a lot of excitement in that dance.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see, Zainab, I don't know if you're near and up for talking about your connection to community economies. I don't think I've met you yet. Are you there? Maybe they're not here listening. Oh, there, no, yeah.
Hi. Sorry, I was busy to make a meal for me. I'm a researcher. Actually, I'm an academician from Turkey, and I'm one of the ones who attended this group much more 3 years ago or something like that, actually. And my main area is business administration, organization studies. So I do not have any connections with radios or something like this. But there are some community radios in Turkey also. That's why I'm interested in the session. That's all about me.
Fantastic. You know, one of my favorite radio projects is called Knitted Radio, and it comes out of some artists from Istanbul, and they actually made, I shared this once before when I was talking about the radio station as an artistic form, but they made sweaters that have transmitters knitted in with copper wire, and they're really very wonderful. They were made specifically for the 2013 uprisings in Istanbul. And so they're very cheeky, but actually tactical media, you know, sweater. Yeah.
I haven't heard it yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Tom, would love to hear. Thanks a lot, Zainab. It's great to meet you. And Tom, would you feel like sharing anything about your connection to the community economies work and also kind of where you're based and what you're immersed in?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, hello everyone, and thanks for sharing about your amazing work. It's really exciting for me to hear about this. I think I signed up out of curiosity more than anything else. I don't think I have a particularly close relationship to any community radios right now, but as I as Karen, as I interacted with Karen, I realized I have these like strong connections. So I grew up in rural Ireland, where local radio is extremely important in community life. And I grew up with my mother being regularly on radio and using it as a means of she works in community development, and so that was really a key tool for her to connect with communities in this small town. I have family in England, and one of my earliest childhood memories is actually playing around in a radio studio of my uncle, who had a pirate radio station, which was raided twice, and he had all his equipment taken by someone. And now I'm thinking, I don't know any of these stories, and I don't really know what these relationships are with commons and with the state and radio. And yeah, I have lots of questions now that I'm interested in following up. So I think this is a really fascinating topic that I had never considered. I am on the organizing committee of Liviana, so this session is part of this wider gathering, and Anna was involved in this previously as well in the last few years, and I'm a liaison for this session now, so I'm also, as we're talking, I'm sort of taking some notes and trying to think of how topics that come up can be related to the wider network. It's also being recorded, so it'll go up on the YouTube channel of the Community Economies Institute. So I think it's a really exciting topic that within the network I hadn't really seen much reflection on, and now that I hear you speaking, I see so many interesting thoughts and there's lots of things going on out there that both sort of radio enacting community economies and radio as a community economy and lots of things like that. So yeah, it reflect my own background is in human geography, and I came to the Community Economies Research Network as I did my PhD, but I had a pre-existing interest in anti-capitalism and post-capitalism and different anarchism and different ways of economic thinking, and the networks I think provided me with a home during my PhD, which was quite friendly and non-hierarchical and just a very beautiful space for these kind of conversations that helped me to sort of open my own mind to new ideas. So yeah, it's really nice to be here, and thanks, Karen, for convening.
You're reminding me of pleasure. And like I think that's another synergy or crossover between community economies and community radio. You know, a lot of something that stays with me from community economies research is reframing things and appreciating the importance of affect in politics, and that you can, you know, that it can actually be emotionally paralyzing to face something like this thing called capitalism, and that when we reframe and look at things that work, even if they're weak seeming, but pervasive, it changes something internally in the subjectivity and energy and the relationality within community economies too, paying attention to that as an energy that and in exchange. I think that's a huge part of the experience of community radio as well, the relationships and the the making something happen together. So just another, kind of transmission about what community economies is for those who are new to that framework. And Aviv, you actually, since you have, you are so in these different worlds, is there anything you want to add about the community economies side of your life into the mix here?
Well, I mean, I think like you said, the diverse community economies as a framework, it does this kind of diversifying gesture. So when we think of economy, usually we think of monetary exchange or of exchange in general. And when community economies and diverse economies, researchers, scholars talk about it, they talk about all of the different things that sustain life and all of the different things that help us thrive and live well together. So what we've been doing is always kind of the practical nuts and bolts of how to get from point A to point B. How do you actually help participate in generating? Like, you don't create it from nothing. It's not like our creation. What we do, we just contribute something to processes that are already there in our neighborhood. In our neighborhood, I mean, if you just look at it superficially, you could think about it as a kind of entrepreneurial desert, or some place where there's no economies, or there's not so many economies, or just the typical economies. And we and the basic just to start creating community economies or contributing to community economies is to create social infrastructures as spaces for people to gather, not non-imposing spaces. So that's what we did. We used embroidery, we used cooking, and we used radio. And radio suddenly became more and more important. And it's also like, these are spaces that are hard to control, to the point where I really wanted to have conversations about economies in the radio, and they didn't happen because I don't decide what's talked about on the radio. So but just the space itself is a space where ideas can bounce off of each other's, and initiatives can emerge in conversation. Just spaces like that, or the market we created, or Waffle that we mentioned before that we're part of. So this is beyond the thinking reframing. It's like, how do you, in physical and social space, actually do it? It's action research with an emphasis on the action, and then also there's also knowledge creation there. But I mean, the most important thing is actually doing stuff and collaborating and opening spaces for unexpected things to happen in our neighborhood. So I don't know. Do you want to add something, Anna? No.
It's okay. Yes.
I want to apologize because we have to go pick up my daughter from school, so we might disappear.
Thanks for being here. Anyone want to add anything after hearing this mashup now of community radio, community economies? We have, I think, heard from everybody at least a little bit in an introduction. Sean, I don't know how much you shared about the cooperative framework that you're working with that also seems to step into the community economies world, but yeah, anything that is resonating.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing action research come up there. So that's one of the methodologies I'm using within my own research. I'm thinking about, I suppose, this transition of moving, not moving, but bringing Dublin Digital Radio, thinking about how together we can make it into a participatory, kind of cooperative online radio station. So it's something we've been working on for the past 4 years. And I guess part of my action research is to try to make us collectively think through and critique how we manage the media space together. So when I'm talking about a media space, it's not just, I guess, the radio platform or the radio station. It's not just like the meetings we have, but we also have a studio space. Like, how do we kind of think about who has access to that space? How do we think about how that space is managed, ideas around outreach. So, okay, we think we have our community settled, but actually who is the community? How do we incorporate more people? Because a lot of the stuff we do is around like electronic music, dance music, sound art, radio art. But we also do have quite a bit of stuff on like political talk shows or conversations on like different kind of social issues that are happening in Dublin and also in Ireland. So these questions and thinking about, particularly around participation, access, what are the boundaries of like the radio station? Sorry, I'm kind of ranting here, but these are some of the things I guess that I think action research can do collectively. It's like it gives us kind of tools to think about how the radio station functions and how we can make it better for a collective, I guess, or a community, but also thinking about that community in terms of like membership. So if you have a membership model, like how does that membership model functions? Like who has like a voice in terms of meetings, in terms of steering the kind of like the objectives of the station long term, like the questions just start exploding once you kind of scratch the surface about like what a radio station can be. At the start, I think we just thought about it. Oh, the radio station is just about like people discovering new music or new ideas. And then once we started thinking about like how the radio station structures itself internally and also its relationship to listeners, to members, to people that do a show, that people have an interest in like coming to the events that we put on to meet people, you realize, wow, it just goes in lots and lots of different directions, and you feel like you're cultivating something. And like, how does that process of cultivation happen? How do you ensure it? I suppose when you feel like something, like, just to put it briefly in context, I think why we consider the radio station really important is in Dublin, so much cultural spaces have closed down due to like rampant gentrification. So there's a real shortage of both cultural spaces, but also social spaces where people can meet each other, where people can like, just casually, I guess, meet each other, hang out, talk, brew ideas for things to come out of. That we consider the radio station kind of fulfills somewhat that function, particularly because it's like a hybrid, it's digital, and it's like music, it's radio, and it's also like physical space that we believe, okay, we need to collectively think about how this space can exist 5-10 years into the future because it's important. And I guess that's where it starts tying into this kind of community economies idea, stuff that I haven't actually heard about really until like a few days ago, but it's definitely a trajectory of things that we were thinking about. This conversation is interesting because it's kind of weaving these different strands together, and like, I suppose, giving myself further frameworks to think about how to apply action research and like how this action research can actually benefit the station. And like, when I say the station, I also mean like members and like the people that like get the benefit out of it in different shapes or forms.
Yeah, it sounds like also the kind of discourse in Dublin and surrounding areas, like these are important spaces for keeping certain ideas alive and energized. Anna, you had a question. Welcome.
My question is regarding radios as co-ops, and I'd like to understand whether you're meaning cooperatives of workers or different kind, and in which way. Because one of the challenges that the radio is related to providing better spaces for people who are stressed out because of mental health issues is precisely how to generate an income if they were to think about radio or radiating as their profession. So.
I mean, I suppose if I can just clarify, maybe there's two questions. One is a cooperative structure, but then the other is an income generating structure, right? Because those are maybe not always necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, those are two questions. And maybe if you'd like to answer the first one, because the second one, I would have to explain a lot of things to get into that one. So we'll leave it for another time maybe, but the first one is good for me to be clear on what you mean. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So we are a membership co-op. So how we use the cooperative model, I guess, is that anybody that does a radio show is a member of the station. So they pay generally around €5-6 a month. And if you are a listener and you like what the radio station does and you want to become a member, maybe you can access workshops on media training, or you can access the studio and record, like either for recordings, or if you're a member of the station also, you can come to our events for free. So and that kind of does kind of answer slightly your second question, because that's the only way we're funded. Like, we will get Arts Council funding or Dublin City Council funding, maybe for one-off events, but in terms of the everyday radio activities, the organizing, like, we're voluntary run. Like, all the income that comes in through the membership pays for the running costs of the station. And that means, like, members can run for different positions of the steering committee. They can have access to, they can come to our open meetings, they can vote, they can put forward different types of ideas, etc. So we're still figuring out how that model works, because that's the idealized version. And practicalities, like, they can kind of sometimes commit to tension, but this is the learning curve for us as well.
Thank you, because that clarifies for me something that actually goes on, and I put a link in the chat. And this is an organization that is also run on a membership basis, like you were describing. Yet in this organization, the question about generating cooperatives of workers came up, and that's a process that we are supporting as a research team collaborating with them. So it's interesting to hear that. Thank you. Gracias.
So thanks for that. Everyone's voice is in the mix, and we have about 30 minutes or so. And I thought we could transition to this. Some of the things that we experiment with at Radio Multe are, I mentioned this think along, and when we've done a think along, or when we've done certain kind of unthinking exercises, like we unthought the radio, and it was so fun. Like, you really, even just how an analog radio works, like unthinking the antenna, and inviting different kinds of associative thing, like, so that people don't feel like that they actually see. It's also kind of reframing relationship to technology. So not necessarily feeling like you have a lack in terms of knowing an antenna, but like, what do you know about an antenna? And then what, out of those conversations, what else an antenna might be? So those are kind of generative conversations that I've been part of in different radio station contexts. And in this context, I guess I wanted something that feels alive for me that I would propose for us to do as a think along is just, what's interesting to you in this mashup between community economies and community radio. And it's not towards creating a consensus, but like just to kind of hold in this, maybe thinking of like a set of ingredients, just if there is anything alive for you. It doesn't have to be what is alive for someone else, but how these two interface. So it can be like an aspect of communication or an aspect of the cooperative model or anything, just to see where this kind of mashup goes in your own world, so that we can inspire each other, perhaps. I can just, maybe I'll put one out there just to, maybe as an example in case this is unclear, but I mentioned at the beginning, I'm really curious about FM as a commons, and also, it was so great to hear Sean make this point yesterday about online radio, to really think about it. It activated for me, like, yes, I've been thinking a lot about this world of data centers and like the massive infrastructures that are just going to be more and more part of the geographical part of this planet, to sustain different kinds of online practices. So what are the possibilities in things like mesh networks, if we're going to be not just using FM, but other kinds of networks and technologies for communication. I'm really curious how community economies and radio and communication practices can learn there. So that actually gets me very excited. But anyone else want to chime in the spirit of a think-along about how these ideas, what they activate for you?
Sorry, I was about to apologize because I think someone has this room booked and I need to go, but I really want to carry on with this conversation. So I'm going to try and come back in and find a new place because I do have something that I think I want to raise. Or maybe be like 5 minutes, sorry.
Okay, great. Thanks. Welcome back soon. So yeah, anything else, even if it's an unformed idea around where community economies, as it's been touched on here, we really just kind of touched on community economies framework and community radio. Both are very, very complex, rich, multidimensional worlds.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Just on the mesh network thing, this is a very unformed idea, but the only reason that that type of language had come on my radar in the last few months was some work in Kenya by an organization called Grassroots Economics, which is doing experimenting with what they call community asset vouchers. So they're sort of it's kind of like a remake of community currencies, but they're trying to integrate indigenous practices with community currencies. So rather than just trying to sort of reenact a monetary economy, they hold community-based exchanges and rotating labor associations and things like this. It's really fascinating, and they also integrate it into blockchain, and it's a really complex. And I've been just trying to get my head around it a lot. And then one aspect of what they've been doing has also been creating mesh internet networks. So this, I guess, very different to radio in some way, but it just I thought it was they kind of created a virtuous cycle whereby they had these community vouchers, and the more the network expanded, or the more someone helped grow that mesh network, the more they would earn some of these vouchers for exchange in their community. And it just seemed like a virtuous spiral, or a virtuous cycle of creating real infrastructures and the social infrastructure that goes with that, and community economies and mesh networks. So just something that pops into my head, and it may be worth, maybe I can find some link and share it. But for me, that was just opening my mind to how communities can build networks and how they value them, and away from money and away from sort of, yeah, I don't know, sponsorship in fiat currency, but in other forms. And yeah.
That's beautiful. Can you say the name again?
So the organization is Grassroots Economics, and so that will come up prominently, for example, if you search online. It's a Kenyan-based NGO that's doing really, really interesting work, both regenerating and reminding, sort of helping to restore community-based economic practices, and also bring in a lot of internet-based sort of new technologies and things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, anything else come up? It can be like very unformed idea in the spirit of the think along.
Yes, I have something. I don't really know what it is. It's about something's congealing in my mind about the beautiful idea of putting these two things together, because there is always this idea of free labor coming up, I think, or the idea of free labor. And I think it's starting to float in my head, or the problematics about what we're doing, or setting up a radio and then doing people asking, are you asking stuff for free? But it's also saying it's also a space. And I guess what Sean's talking about also is these platforms being volunteer led, but also they are providing something else which is not present, which is this opportunity, or it's providing a connection within communities. I think it's providing something else which is beyond an economic system, and I think that's, or beyond not an economic system but a capitalist system. And I think that's kind of, I find that really beautiful, and somehow to put that into words is a harder practice. It's like, how do I communicate that? How do we communicate this, of what we're doing with this, that there is a value in what this thing is doing, I guess, in pulling people together.
Right.
And I think that's what we've been, or what brought me and Sam together is this thing about the potential of radio to bring people together, to do something. I think Aviv also talked about is what goes on behind the radio, which is really as important, if not more important, than the actual content of the radio. I think certainly what we've been doing, and I think that is something, the value is like figuring out that value system, or figuring out and communicating that value. Yeah, I don't know. That wasn't really very well formed, but it's
Oh my
around
God, it was perfectly formed. I feel like it really resonates. And, you know, just to put out there are these exercises in community economies work where you, returning back to that iceberg image, there are prompts to help make visible for yourself the diverse economies in any enterprise. And if that's something that the independent community radio network would be curious about, like, we could do something together. It would be a lot of fun just to see what would come of that.
Yeah, I was just nodding along because it sounds really good. But I'm also trying to formulate thoughts because I will listen a bit more.
Sorry to be so dramatic before. I feel like it was
No, it's good.
like I had to leave.
Energy.
But I was like kind of excited. And I think maybe what I was gonna start a conversation about is maybe what James actually picked up on. So, but I think, and sorry, because I obviously didn't hear a lot of what you said, but a lot of my questions around kind of community economies in general, and with, I guess, creative outputs that are less mainstream, is that I feel a lot of creative practitioners or people who have a creative outlet that they either do that is either monetized or could be a hobby. If we kind of lose community radio to a mainstream, or to something that isn't necessarily part of a wider, or if we don't recognize that there's a wider fabric to a lot of these pursuits and a lot of these creative pursuits, then we begin to kind of like homogenize everything. And that's where I find community economies really important in this, is because it's as you say, like, if we look at the iceberg, we need to understand that everything is a fabric and a mesh, and that if everything is homogenized into one kind of large, what's the word?
Like monocrop, or
Exactly, yeah, like a monoculture, or a universality is kind of the word I was looking for. And we're just not going to have the beauty that exists. So where, you know, especially in a place like Bristol, where I feel like a lot of we've got a lot of places where really interesting creative stuff can happen on a hobbyist level. And I hate using the term hobbyist, but I think so for example, we've got like the Cube, which is a huge kind of music and cinema, and again was set up by a bunch of radicals who are post-capitalist. Kate Rich is very involved in the kind of community economies network, and just thinking about how all of that is kind of being flattened out by large developments of luxury flats. We, in the last year, I've seen Nudes being one of them, but Jamaica Street stores, lots of artist studios, lots of like film production companies having to do crowdfunders to kind of get their building that they're in as a community asset, to kind of give them that stability against the kind of mainstream. So yeah, I think like that's for me like a really interesting thing to consider, and conversation to consider within kind of how these two things link over, is if we don't have, if everything is being monetized and we feel a pressure to kind of go down a cooperative model and question and challenge the fact that there are many volunteers or a lot of people keeping this kind of beautiful creativity going on a voluntary level, I think we're kind of causing a problem because it shouldn't matter. Like, not everyone needs to monetize their hobby. Not everyone needs to, but they can still find enjoyment in that creative pursuit. So I think that's a big question for me, is kind of how do we protect spaces to be able to explore those things without it having to be perfectly polished, or without it having to be broadcast media, or, you know, keeping those community spaces that are just people, pardon my French, but just chatting shit sometimes. But you know, it's more than that. But you know, or they're sharing a mix that they've made, or you know, it's something that is really important and an outlet for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I even wonder if we were to do the diverse economy, the iceberg exercise, or things like that, that activate the economic diversity of our radio stations, for instance, do we even foreclose the other kinds of diversity, you know, like by just obsessing on the economics? Like, what are the multiplicity of ways of mapping or noticing what is happening in a station? It's not only through an economic narrative. You know, maybe there has to be a reason why you're documenting the diversity. Towards what end? What are you hoping to amplify? It's not always just the economics, but maybe that's one part of it. Anissa, I don't know if that's how you pronounce your name, but nice. Thanks for joining us. And we've been doing something where people who are in the Zoom are and say a little bit about their connection. Would you be comfortable saying a little bit of like where you're based, what your connection is, I think, to the community economies work and that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Karen. It's Anissa. You said it right. And sorry for joining late, everyone. I was in a meeting. So I'm currently based in Vermont in the USA on Abenaki homelands. I moved here just a month ago from Sydney, Australia, from Darug country, where I finished up 6 years working with Catherine Gibson and Stephen Healy on my doctorate. Yeah, now I'm doing a postdoc with the Institute for Agroecology. So my work is mainly in food governance, democratizing food governance, working on agroecology and food sovereignty. I do a lot of work with social movements, and I come from a background in herbal medicine and agroecological market gardening and healing arts, cooperatives. Didn't get into academia till I was in my mid-30s. But where I did my undergraduate degree, which was in Nogajewonong, Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, at Trent University, we had a university radio station, and it was producer radio. Like, we produced everything ourselves, and it was so great. I had a radio show called Food Fight with a friend, and we just got together. We'd talk about food politics, news, we'd play fun songs, we'd share recipes, we have different themes. We interviewed people sometimes on that show, and there were lots of people doing great community things. Two of my friends, Chris and Em, they had a Choose Your Own Adventure radio show. You know those books, Choose Your Own Adventure? And everyone would call in and be like, they should open the door, or, you know, whatever it was. And that was a pretty vibrant space as well. And just coming into the end of, Will, what you were talking about monetizing creativity, and, you know, none of it was monetized. We did it because we loved to do it. And it was a real space of gathering and just hanging out and doing fun stuff. I got to do like somebody wrote like a play or something, and it was like a funny murder mystery, and I got to play a Southern belle in that murder mystery. My name was Oh Violet Murderess. And I stayed up all night watching like Steel Magnolias and preparing for the accent. And we had fun sound effects. And so there was like people who were really into like the sound effects and the, you know, it was a dark and stormy night and you'd have like the thunder in the background. And oh man, I had so much fun. So I really wanted to be here and think with you and hear about radio. And Karen Kath has mentioned you to me right back at the beginning of my dissertation. So I really wanted to join. Thanks. Thanks for giving me the space to share.
Great to hear what you're up to. And, you know, I would say that being in Vermont, strangely enough, was a big part of my journey to radio. Can you believe it? But I used to teach for many years at a college in Vermont called Goddard College, which just closed, but has had a fantastic community radio station connected to the college. And of course, in this landscape of community radio, in different countries, the universities, I know that in North America, I don't know about other parts of the world, but there are the university radio station is its own very vital resource. And it's also an incredible, it got me thinking a lot about the radio as a space of conveying the knowledge making we're doing too, like to blur these boundaries between university and more popular forms of media, and communication as this, this thing that can actually break down boundaries and borders, and expand. Like we have to learn how to communicate in ways that are far reaching beyond, say, university forms of discourse. Yeah. So we have like 15 more minutes, and Anissa, just to tell you, we are doing a think along right now at this phase of the transmission, where we're just kind of free associating and mashing together what we've talked about before about practices. Half the people on the call right now are from community radio, the other half from community economies, and just, what's alive for all of us. And it can be an incoherent think along, and just what's at the edge of your own articulation or thought or question, about, how these worlds might support each other or even step on each other.
Are you broadcasting live?
Yeah, we are broadcasting live. We're on 3 different radio stations.
That's amazing.
Yeah, Dublin Digital. You want to do a shout out, Sean, for Dublin Digital, and then James and Sam, you can do it for Out of the Office Radio.
You're listening here to Dublin Digital Radio. Hope you're still with us. And I guess Sam and James.
Hi.
You're also listening to a radio Out of Office Radio, kind of live from Helsinki, but also kind of live from anywhere. And
and you're
Live
listening
from all
to
over.
Radio Multe 93.8 FM, although I actually think the FM is not working today because of a little technical thing, but and online at radiomulte.live.
And we're thinking along together.
We're doing a think along about community economies meets community radio, meets community economies, meets community radio. And just birthing possibilities, questions. One idea that's emerged is, do some community radio stations that are part of this network that Sam has instigated, the Independent Community Radio Network, are they interested in doing the kind of iceberg, making visible, making audible? I think there's interesting things too in community radio about listening to community economies, not just seeing them. We're maybe perhaps just fully vision ocular focused research practice. I don't know. There's also kind of different body, I think feeling the relationality has been an important part of community economies work too. but what happens when you bring in listening? Yeah, any other associations, think along, dream along ideas about community economies? Any questions about either community radio, community economies?
Got a kind of question. It's more for Sean actually, because it's about this membership model, and because I'm just kind of curious. It's something that we've been looking at. Our model is very free at the moment. I guess we don't really even have an economy.
You definitely have one. Yeah.
Like it's very light touch. We've set up off a grant essentially, and our overheads, because we have no studio, our overheads are practically nothing. So they're as small as they could be, which gives a certain amount of flexibility, and I guess, but also problematics. And I'm kind of interested in the membership model, about whether that kind of creates a community or whether it solidifies a community, and how that might enforce a level of or support a level of community involvement, I guess, in terms of giving some kind of structure to an involvement that perhaps is there, but if you see what I mean. So by becoming a member, are you more officially part of that community?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the idea of a membership model came from, so I was involved in a previous project called Rabble, which was it was a magazine, it was a publication. And when I joined, it was like year 6, year 7 of the project. And we were really struggling because we had no income. We had so much Facebook followers, like 30,000, but you can't monetize Facebook followers. But we were thinking, so at the same time I was kind of involved with Rabble, were talking about starting this membership model. And I was like, okay, that would make a lot of sense for Dublin Digital Radio because we're at the start of our project. Like, rather than trying to convince everybody that was getting the publication for free, now please can you subscribe because this project isn't working anymore. We need some funding. It would be much easier to kind of at least start that conversation earlier on in the project, so that would become like the norm. Although we weren't using the language of membership at the time. Were we? I don't think so. I think it was more of the language of like subscriptions and can you please subscribe to the station? If you subscribe to the station, you will be able to access our monthly events for free. You will be able to do a radio show. You will be like stuff I said earlier, like attend workshops, etc. And I don't know if it's solidified a kind of community, but I think what it tried to do was structure expectant, I'm not going to say behaviors, but structure kind of some type of expectations around what we do. So that this project was trying to build something, that collectively we were trying to build something together, and the only way that this project was going to be built was if we collectively built it through a membership model or through collective subscriptions. But I've seen other projects that don't try to build that kind of like structured basis or structured foundation at the start, as I was saying with Rabble, and it hits a wall eventually. And so earlier on the thinking, we're like, okay, we want to institute some type of membership scheme or some type of subscription scheme that means that there would be some longevity to the project. It also meant a way for, I guess, trying to think of ways to facilitate people being involved in the project that went beyond the founding members or the early kind of people that were involved in the project. And there was a way, once it took a while to figure out, but once we knew people were kind of paying subscription, okay, like, well, then how do we formalize this, that people are not just paying subscription and it's like transactionary, that it's the subscription is your membership that allows you to participate in the democratic functioning of the organization. Whether that's a community or not, I'm not quite sure. There's definitely a community around the station, but maybe sometimes they run parallel. They're probably the same thing, but sometimes the expectation of a community is like it's fluid. What can be a community today is not the same community as tomorrow. But like with a membership structure, you're keeping the focus on like the actual building of the thing, of the I guess the radio station, rather than on yeah, like vibes, like community vibes or whatever. And I think that's the big thing. James, I have no idea if I answered your question.
Yeah, you answered it very well. But while I was thinking about that, another question came up, because I realized that focused very much on like capital. I guess there's a capital exchange, and the other thing I guess that we've done recently, which I think has been very nice, is we did an event at a greenhouse. But I think one of the things, the transactions that went on there was food, and I think I had a question also for Karen about this, because I think it's involved a lot of these things about how food is a center. And I think Aviv talked earlier about how kind of whether a collective or community kitchen in a way, but then linking that to radio somehow does something very interesting. I think that there's a coming together around food, which is kind of a transaction, but it's not. There's some very communal about this. So I was kind of curious about what goes on there.
So
I
nice
don't
to
know.
think of, the potluck as again, like what happens when you call the potluck an economy? Like, does that kind of instrumentalize the spirit of a potluck? But just the potluck is it's just such a great thing. Potlucks are amazing. And I suppose it's really resonant as a metaphor. And we do a potluck with every single broadcast event. We now organize our broadcasts as monthly events, and we always have food, and try and weave even a nice, like we'll have one in December, we'll make it into a holiday meal. And so it's I mean, I haven't really fully thought about it or conceptualized it, but it's it's because the aim of the station is really not just about sending out, but bringing in and making a community. And specifically the one in Bergen that I'm part of is, Radio Multe, it's trying to create within the ecology of the art scene here, an ecology that is not just the same demographics that a lot of the art scenes are. So it's trying to experiment with age diversity, ethnic diversity, kind of a diaspora and intergenerational, and different multilingual, I think that those kinds of communities are really important in Norway in particular. There's a need for that. So the food, of course, is just such an easy way to bring people together. And I guess, again, it has a kind of economy of its own. Yeah.
Karen, do you know, I can't pronounce their name, but there's a community radio I've just posted in the chat. I can't say this. It's a Danish station in Aarhus, and they're really new, and they're kind of a youth center, but they work a lot with young groups, and they're obsessed with making radio around food. So like I think every few weeks they run a sandwich shop, and the whole thing is you come in, you buy a cheap sandwich, and then you're participating in radio, because it's this idea of encouraging people to join their community and engage in radio making, and just showing that it can be as easy as just coming and having a sandwich with them, and automatically they're joining the broadcast because they set up the space to be a live broadcast. So you're kind of eating together and conversing. And yeah, but they're like a very interesting new community radio whose name I can't pronounce. Anyone wants to give it a go.
I won't try to pronounce the name, but what you just described reminded me of what the Hare Krishnas do. Feed people, bring them in.
I
like it. I like it. Food as a way of building a cult following for radio.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you also see it in a lot of community radio like stations, like the actual physical spaces, there's often, like Kashmir Radio do it really well. They have this bar and often they mic it up so you can kind of participate in the broadcast you can always forget that you're participating in the broadcast, and it can produce really beautiful radio. And it has this space where multiple things can be happening at the same time, because they've created these kind of zones. And for those, like, I know Sean is nodding here because he's been to Kashmir. They have a very inspiring station. And yeah, I think these spaces for eating and drinking is a feature of a lot of community radio stations, like the physical stations.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of the session time-wise. I feel like we have created a circle of conversation here that I feel invested in the moment to keep some of the ideas here alive, and to keep them in the air and see where they can go. And just want to thank everybody for being part of this. And thank you, Tom, for holding the fort for us on behalf of Liviana. Thank you. Liviana has just really been medicinal to hear about a lot of different community economy projects and practitioners has been really good for my well-being in the last couple of weeks. So it's been really nice. And Tommy, you've held that really well. And yeah, thank you, community radio friends. Nice to meet you, Anisan. We'll be in touch. And Zainab, really nice to meet you as well. Thanks for chiming in. So yeah, conversations can keep continuing in informal and maybe formal ways. So over and out, listeners, and until next time. I'm gonna stop the stream.
Karen.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers,
Thanks.
Karen. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Karen. Bye.